right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of Harriet B's Daughters channel here on TETV. So we have kind of a fun experiment going on this week. Today is episode 1. We've got one of our members and guest, Jee Vaghn Knight. She's going to chat with us a little bit about where the Venn diagram of live entertainment, particularly theme parks and themed entertainment, intersects with branding and marketing. We've started to discover, particularly with NHBD, but in the industry, that generationally there's some different conceptions and misconceptions about how those thoughts and planning play in. Jee's going to tell us a little bit about her path that brought us here in just a moment.
Oh gosh. All right.
Just the highlights. She doesn't have to tell us everything. Go check her out on LinkedIn. But we're also doing this as kind of a co-production. So tomorrow we're going to keep this conversation going. RedRover, which is Jee's company, is hosting a fantastic panel of women in leadership, including city leadership in Shelby County, nonprofit leadership, and we've all got a pretty solid, these interesting backgrounds and talking about what is it to be your whole authentic self? What is it in all of these different spheres? How similar all of those things are for how different they seem on the outside. And we're here for a bit of time. So what you've got is a little bit of a special case. I've known Jee for several decades at this point. It goes back to grade school. We're getting close to 3. Terrifyingly. Actually, I think we
passed 3.
I think we're past 3 decades of knowing each other. And entertainingly, always assumed our lives were totally different, and in and out, we wind up in each other's zones all the time as that happens. And part of that is also the discussion of one of the biggest ways that entertainment is used is as a tool for marketing and branding. We can't really say coming from a pure art nonprofit world, even that, there's always a conversation of what the consumer wants. What do your guests want to see? What are they coming, whether it's your guest or your patron, your audience, however you code that, what are they coming for, is a big part of how we craft what we choose to do. And Jee's wandering path has taken her straight into one of the most fascinating women-led variants of that business, where they can even deliver you a specific metric on guarantees. And we're going to get into how they do that. This is also as most of our shows are hoping to be, this is very guest-led. So anybody who's out there, this is open to your conversation and questions. We can sit and talk about Star Trek for 2 hours and if that's what people want to dish on, and we're happy to. We are both humans who have spent years of our lives living out of a suitcase, both on purpose and because that's where the business took us. We are people who have spent whole years choosing to straight change your life, at that point where we've both done major midlife changes. We've done early life changes. This is a question I get a lot of the time is, how do you decide to do that? So either of us are always willing to talk about what got us to those points, what helped us through those. So we can go anywhere. We're going to start at the intersection of LBE and themed entertainment. Jee, why don't you pick 5, because you've had a hell of a career, so we're not going to make you rehash the whole story and how you decided to like stories as a kid. But where did what you thought was Nikki's crazy business start to overlap?
Okay, so I'm coming to you guys from Memphis, Tennessee, which is the new chapter in my life, bringing my family to a music city, which was new. I come to Memphis via, Santa Fe, New Mexico, via Houston, Texas, via Washington, D.C., via Los Angeles, via Central Valley, California. And we're not going to go all the way back to Central Valley, California. So my life, when I always thought after I hit DC that I was like trying to go back west, and then we have now taken a sudden U-turn and moved to Memphis, Tennessee. How our paths converge, though, I would say classically, from the outside, I was like academic business, and Nicola was like artist and creative, and we were kind of in those buckets for a really long time. And then my path started converging. I joined a historic preservation company in Washington, D.C. And so that was me working with artists who restore fountains and sculptures. And it was super exciting for me. And it was also scientific because they used chemicals to break things down and to clean them and to seal them and to protect them. They sent me to Houston, Texas to run the Saturn V rocket restoration, the Saturn V rocket that's on display at the Johnson Space Center. There are 3 that still exist from the Apollo era that are intact. One is in Houston, one is in Huntsville, and one is in Florida. I've worked on 2 of the 3. I'd love to add the 3rd one to my card, but I've since left that industry as a whole. But that was my first intersection anywhere in museum or entertainment spaces, because the rocket was an extension of Space Center Houston. And it was also my first foray into construction and construction project management, and being a nice, like 5 foot tall woman of color running a construction job site in Houston, Texas. Like, one of these days, we should turn that into a sitcom, Nicola, because it is kind of hilarity upon hilarity. I moved from historic preservation into kind of like IT project management, a kind of planner of things, and then ended up in the digital creative space. So I was building websites with a team for the studios in Los Angeles. So did a lot of movie websites, Star Trek Into Darkness, Hugo, The Wolf of Wall Street, brands where you have to jump in head first. You have to understand the brand in, basically 2 minutes flat. And then be able to produce great digital experiences. I took a break from that and joined my hometown hero, Meow Wolf, in Santa Fe, because we've been there for about 15 years and watched. I've been around that company since before it was a company, as a New Mexico story, as a Santa Fe story. I remember the bowling alley before it became Meow Wolf. And joined them for a year, which was, I think, the first time where Nicola and I were like, hey, we're in the same industry. Cool. It only took us 35 years to get there, but now we're in the same industry. And that was my closest intersection to not just entertainment, but themed entertainment and location-based entertainment. And then I was really looking for just a different change in career. Like, what was the next path? What was the next step? And where did me and my family want to go after we'd been in New Mexico for 15 years? And Memphis popped up on our radar. We put it on our short list of places if a perfect job popped up. And this agency came across my desk. I didn't think I'd go back to the agency world. The agency world is a churn and competitive. You are fighting to win every single day you're in the agency, unlike when you have a job within a marketing department, because, clients are win-lose, every day. And this agency, the story got me. So it's founded by a woman named Lori Turner Wilson. She comes from the corporate marketing space. She was pretty much hands down tired of agencies that would pitch their services to her and they would not guarantee their results. They wouldn't even entertain what it would take to guarantee their results. They wouldn't even go down the path of, if I'm willing to pay for it, what would it take for you to guarantee results? And in the marketing space, there's a huge shell game of vanity metrics and reach and all these glorious numbers that get touted all over the place. And at the end of the day, she's like, how can you guarantee that we make money? Because, that's what is going to create more opportunity and more jobs and, more ability to spread your message. And so when she left the corporate space, she went straight into, I'm going to found that agency that I couldn't find. Was that short enough, Nicola? I felt like that was the short version.
I think that's a good start. You know,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot today is from both of our views and paths of it, everything overlaps. We've had a lot of conversations about this, both as friends and as colleagues,
Mm-hmm.
is that the most dangerous thing we can do is disregard the relevance of something to our experience, right? And sometimes it's stopping to go, okay, well, how is this like this? But my experience when I started moving into what is location-based entertainment 15 years ago, many of our design firms were design services firms. They do run to some extent off of the agency model. You are bidding, you are looking for clients, right? And in many ways, one of the things we discovered, I'm going to jump into it this way. When we were prepping for this show, we were talking with our producers, and one of the things that's great about Cathy and Emily, who I'm giving a shout out to again, watch all of their shows. They're fantastic. Is they help keep me honest about generational perceptions of the industry. I've been in themed entertainment and the branding space for 15 years. And before that, it was all large scale live entertainment. And from I don't think I made it past 18 where I didn't routinely hear the phrase, it's not show fun, it's show business, over and over and over. And part of that is being a management background, right? We've talked about, this is something that Jee and I can also talk about fantastically, which is no matter what your product is, you're in the business of managing humans. And that has been where I have drugged so many people from what seem like outlying areas in my life back into HBD, is that what that is there to serve as is a bouncing board, right? Is other people who are like, how did you get through this? And you can go down to the monotypes of like the 7 people you meet and read a book like that and know how to do it. But also everybody is different, and there are a lot of similar personalities you'll deal with all over the world. And sometimes it helps to get perspective that we tend to get too precious about it in themed entertainment. I'll just say it that way. Like, nobody can ever understand what we do in personalities. And it's like, well, the dynamics of a creative director personality for a theme park is not so different from the art director that Jee is dealing with on movie launches. And quite frankly, it's not very different from how a marketing executive within a bank sees themselves.
Yeah, I'll take that one step farther.
Yeah.
I get business owners who tell me, yeah, but do you really understand my industry? Because we're unique. And yes, you know, your products are probably unique and what you offer is unique. But when you boil it down to the business model, there are more similarities than uniqueness. So when you boil it down, it's like, you may not understand our industry and there's all this lingo. And I said, great. Are you on a distribution model? Yes. Are you exclusively distribution, or do you have some direct to consumer? Oh, no, we're exclusively distribution. Guess what? You have more similarities to this bridal company we work with than somebody who sells something similar but goes direct to consumers. So, like, we are unique, but sometimes that is an excuse to hide in your own space instead of crossing that collaborative line with the person in front of you.
Yeah, and part of what we discovered, and I've had this conversation several times, right? You can find this, it's written in books, it's case studies, it's all over the place. The golden child of themed entertainment is, of course, always held up to be Imagineering. As it is organized, Imagineering is a marketing unit. It is the tax loss leader for the parks and resorts division that develops things that makes people want to come to. As a producer project manager, if you're running one of those spaces, yes, you're working on the time and the budget and the schedule and the resources and all of that. That's construction management, or that's people management. But one of your biggest goals is something compelling that people want to come to. That's branding. That's marketing. And we can get super concerned about that. But overwhelmingly, when we talk about creating clear creative goals that we're open to our teams collaborating on and hitting. I'm going to open up to some jargon here. That's a KPI. A KPI is a key project indicator. The amount of times that we walk into a ride or an attraction and say, what's your KPI? And people can't define that. I guarantee you're going to find a creative team that's frustrated because they're being managed under, well, I'll know it when I see it, which that happens in other business all the time. Again, we treat it like it's specialty, like nobody's ever had to deal with this. And actually, it's a very common crutch, right? Like, well, just keep bringing me ideas. Yeah.
So why is marketing a 4-letter word in your industry? like what is the version of marketing that this industry is holding on to that makes it this 4-letter word, and that it somehow tarnishes the sanctity of art, which we can go into that.
I have a theory. Well, and what's hilarious is that there is pretty much at this point there's a couple of folks who will tell you that they do art for art's sake, but pretty much everybody will say, we're not like those arm wavy art people. We know function, we know operation. So there's all of these perceptions of, and here's something that's useful, right? It is useful to know what you don't do. I have a suspicion that like many things in our industry, we're holding on to the ideas of our founders, right? We are a young industry. Disney World turns 50 this year, or Disneyland is hitting its 60th anniversary. Yes, we're based off Tivoli. Yes, we're based off a million other things. Cedar Fair's been around for 100 years. But we didn't always think of ourselves as creative. And I think there were two things that kind of led to that. One, it is the young and somewhat immature. I'm not going to be, we're different. We're striking out our own. We run into this in themed entertainment all the time. Nobody can ever understand us. We're doing something entirely different. And yet everything we do is built off of misappropriating somebody else's. I also suspect that given generationally where a lot of our folks entered the industry, we had a lot of people with scarring from the old agency advertising model of the 60s and 70s. That's a theory. Right? I don't have hard data for that one. But the more I talk to people, the more I see it. And here's the thing. Most design services units at this point, we have hundreds of companies that are members of this industry. Pretty much all of us have done at least one branding experience that we did. It's a consumer center. Really, the World Expo, when you work on the World Expo, right? That's a global party of companies and countries advertising themselves, right? There seems to be a fear in saying that part out loud, that it's all branding. And it's interesting because it's something we're intersecting with as people present themselves more and more on social media. And that's where we interact with people like, oh, well, that's not authentic. Well, who are you to say what's authentic? First off. Secondly, we have centuries and decades of only one version of authentic is safe and allowed, and you have to show me that you can code to that to be allowed in the room, particularly women, particularly our Black bodies and brown bodies and people of color who want to enter the industry, right? How many times have any of us been put through in an interview of, well, do you think you're too creative for corporate? Or the other way, do you think you're too corporate for creative? And they're all the same. Madeline Pendergast jumped in. Imagineering is marketing unit. It's a great take. And it's a thing that we forget about, right? It's a thing that we forget until we are sitting there being told over and over in blue sky. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter whose blue sky you're going through. You're going to have a demographic that you're hitting. You're going to have consumer insights on what that market wants. And if you're not, you're ignoring it. Right?
You're ignoring it because, okay, if you're independently wealthy and you just want to create art and you don't give to whatever's that anybody consumes it or anything like that, then yes, you can sit on the sanctity of art and sit in that space. But if you're asking another human being for something, their time, a transaction, their dollars, their focus, which is a thing we ask and we demand of people all the time, there's a transaction there between human beings, or, business to human beings. And so to ignore who is going to be consuming this information, I'm having words like ludicrous. Like, you don't have to be entirely a slave and beholden to that, but marketing is essentially communicating. And if you don't care about who you're communicating to, why are we communicating in the first place?
And I think that's a misconception, right? There's many misconceptions about what marketing and advertising and branding are. And I think it's one of the things that, entertainingly, as somebody who was, Mad Men started the same year that I kind of entered the commercial sphere. Now, I say kind of entered because if you think Jersey Boys is not a commercial project that is to a demographic and looks at its market and plans where it's going, then, there's part of it was I had gotten to the point after my initial 15 years in parks of like, oh, everything's looking at who it's in. There's this conception that advertising tells you what you want. What was interesting about Mad Men is that they actually did a really good job of representing how often it was listening to the unspoken and speaking to that. And I will argue that both a really good wraparound entertainment experience and a good branding or advertising or marketing campaign are much more about a communication empathy of listening to what people want and showing them what it could be and showing themselves in it. And I think that may be part of the 4-letter word, although, like, that's what's funny, right? How many times do we create an attraction where we're telling people what they want to see? And somebody else is telling us that's too scary, and we're like, no, they just don't know. They haven't seen it yet. It can feel like that is throwing off the shackles of marketing and selling and all of those. And I would argue that part of what we're moving into in this wraparound world where it's much more about we're competing for people's time and focus energy is a communicative empathy. We're having conversations with people. Let me ask this: what's a campaign that you have seen out in the wild that has stopped you and gone, oh, that was good? So, like, you have to take out all of yours. But
keep talking. Hold on.
But it's the same thing, right? We ask people all the time what their favorite attraction was, and I get some stunned looks because my favorite attraction is actually standing in a fully immersive area, eating in it. Like, so Diagon Alley is a great example. I love to stand in Diagon Alley and drink a frozen butterbeer and watch people. That to me is even better than getting on a ride, watching them go through it. But we can all talk about a campaign that changed us, right? My brothers and I have a tape from 1984, and we sing, like, one of my younger brothers wasn't even born yet. And we still call each other and sing the jingles of the commercials that are in between the Christmas specials from 1984 that we're watching together. That is part of our holiday tradition, right? So the My First Sony campaign was one of the first campaigns that I ever saw myself in, saw lots of people, and was like, I didn't even want the product. And years later, upcycling and free selling, I now have a My First Sony, and I was very excited to get that for my 40th birthday. But realizing, as I'm older and can start to look at it and articulate it, oh, what I loved about this as a kid was it showed kids, and it showed kids just being kids and being excited about something for the pure joy of experimenting with technology. So Jee, talk to me about the campaigns that have shaped you, that you've went into and gone, oh, that's good.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a pop culture gap here, coming from a family that didn't allow any non-PBS television until I was like 14 or so. So admittedly, there's a whole like 1980s, early 1990s gap. I will say, like, there's ones that are good in the messaging, and then there are ones that are good in the execution. And if you grew up in California, the DARE campaign combined with This Is Your Brain on Drugs cracking egg campaign is like seared into your head. So great on execution for its repetitiveness. Wouldn't say it like stopped and took my breath away. I would say like in modern times, you know, the ones that really hit are the ones that are poignant and relevant. So there's a ton of COVID, not spoofs, but what you call them, the montages that are showing all of the different corporate campaigns and how it's like, you know, cue piano music, you know, cue slide about how we take care of our people, cue about how our products improve this, you know, cue about, you know, a donation to a food bank, you know, drone footage of the city that you're headquartered in, and then, you know, an exit out that, you know, X brand name cares. You know, that's trying to be poignant, but it's not quite there. I think coming to mind, and this is terrible, right when we get off of this, something's going to really come to mind, is it wasn't perfect, but it hit a huge note with me, was I think it was Tampax, Nicola, the Like a Girl.
Oh, yeah.
Campaign.
Oh,
was it? Or was it?
I'll look it up.
Always, you know, and it just hit that note of rechanging that statement, blank like a girl, that I was like, I don't care what you're trying to sell me. I don't even care that I don't need to use those products right now. Like, I am here for this, for the next generation of young women that are going to see it, and are going to completely not grow up with that phrase the way we did.
Yeah. So it was always. You know, I will even offer, as many times as they've also boffed it and come back, the Dove Be Natural campaign that consistently goes on, right? There's still a lot of coding. There's still a lot of filtering. We got a long ways to go. And I want to put this out to anybody who's watching, our producers in the back room. Like, what were those things that stuck out to you? What were your favorite campaigns that you're seeing? Because with the two of us, we want to talk through, like, what is the part of it, right? And part of it was the same thing that we do about our guests for an attraction. We sit down and ask, who do we want to buy this? Who doesn't know it's out there? What are they missing, or what's leaving them behind in what's already there, right? You know, there's also like just the fact that marketing is advertising. The Duracell bunny doesn't, or the Energizer bunny, and the Duracell can't drop the copper top, and all of those things. Like, we're not telling you how batteries work, right? We're not telling you the use of batteries. We're showing you a hilarious bunny running around. I was running through, you know, right now is a great time for people to be on these nostalgia kicks. And like, there's a lot of stuff out there that's just wacky. And it's just purely there because you laugh. That's entertainment. And it's, you know, there's an overlap that as a production heavy person, right? My business right now is putting out a lot of, because I happen to do a lot of interactives in my early theme park career, putting out interactive beauty counters, right? And that's not themed entertainment. And yet the only people who know how to deal with 2,000 people picking up a product and running a splash screen and doing all that are those of us who have tested it for a park and decided not to get it in there. It's a really, again, like the amount of Thea Awards that we have given for distillery tasting centers and excellent, like, they're great. They're fantastic. They are mini museums of a brand, which hits on our expo and museum area. And they are pulling you into an experience.
Oh, I've got one. Okay. So I've got two. One is, I didn't get to experience it, but it was notorious in our industry, is at South by Southwest. 2004-ish, don't quote me on the year. An agency built an AI-powered Tinder profile. And so, and it was supporting a movie, and it was a movie that had to do with AI, and I'll be remiss if I can't remember what it is. And they launched this Tinder profile at South by Southwest, and the whole point was to see how many people you could get to swipe right. I'm amiss in the dating space because I met my husband at Blockbuster Video, so that dates me entirely. But it was the talk, because it was absolutely marketing that movie. It gained an enormous amount of earned media, which is the holy grail of it when people are talking on their own. And it was tapping into what the movie was, which was a conversation about AI, and what was relevant at the time, which was Tinder. And it used the convergence of South by Southwest to get this profile to be all over that entire weekend. And those are like lightning in a bottle moments where you're capturing what it is right now. You have enough time to execute something, because if it takes 2 years to execute that, it's already gone. And then the other one, and in the entertainment space, and I wonder what it's like to watch this show today, but if you watched Heroes on NBC, back when it originally aired, you could not avoid the whispering commercials, save the cheerleader, save the world. And you waited the entire season to know what this meant. Like, they actually had the strength and the confidence to put this audio clip in the commercials. And the audio clip itself never appears in the show. When the phrase actually shows up, it's said in a completely different way. So it's 100% marketing. And I had somebody a couple years ago be like, oh, I totally binge watched Heroes on Netflix. It's a great show. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's a great show. But I wonder what it was like to experience that show outside of the microcosm of what was happening on the marketing front. Because you just had people who you would just walk up. It was like, when The Matrix came out, it's like, I can't tell you what the movie's about, but you got to go see it. That kind of energy, that it taps, it's temporal, it's not going to exist forever with that property. But obviously back then we didn't know properties were going to exist on streaming forever.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great overlaps again is we spend at this point in the current iteration of location-based entertainment, we do a lot of work with IP, right? The big get is something that's already known, that people already talk about. It's a partnership. We've moved away from created IP of specialty characters and into things that people already know. And what, again, like this is marketing, right? Like that's what makes it worth it to the studio or the distributor to get into it, right? It perpetuates those characters. It gets them living on. Again, with things that people forget are real obvious overlaps because we just like them. All the pop-ups that have shown up, whether it's Strange Things had Starcourt Mall pop up in the last year. There's a number of drive-throughs with all of the haunt experiences, whether it's horror made here or going back to South by Southwest. There was the Westworld put up. Most of those have a theme park, quote unquote theme park design company somewhere in there consulting and working with a marketing and branding team. And again, to the, like, I always laugh at the idea of the purity, remembering that what funded Disneyland and what any of us who have to helm a project pretty much anywhere are looking for is sponsorship opportunities. Kodak, the original Club 33 was the 33 sponsored investor companies and groups. Right? That was a buy-in for them that made it worth it for them to put their product and their money into that park. And we do that all the time, right? Like that's a thing we're looking for. We want that. That's great synergy. And it's also great because we don't have to, if you already know how to use, particularly now that we're moving into so many app-based things that we want to do as an add-on or a layer, the more you already know how to use the app, even if we're putting a different face on it, the less training I have to take you out of whatever experience I'm putting you in to put it back in. I think any of us, and this is another one I will open up to anybody in the chat, we sometimes play charrette bingo, right? There's the glockenspiel, there's the arcade fireballs, there's the glow at the show ears, steampunk. Somebody's just letting me know, Cathy, who's one of our producers, worked on the Stranger Things drive-in itself. We have many members who work on this all the time. And I think that's the thing. There's also, we code this phrase and department in every company we're in of business development. Business development is sales. And it is the sales and marketing of your design services that is out there. Those are often your longest term employees who know the company the best. So it's interesting that we tell ourselves that. And I would say that that's where we do ourselves a huge disservice, right?
Well, and biz dev is the new word for sales being a 4-letter word. But here's the secret to business development. No matter how many books you read, no matter how many courses, no matter how many business development people you don't like, business development is the art of listening. That's what it is. Because if you're listening to the person in front of you, you're going to know if there's an opportunity. And yes, there are techniques to bring them closer to that opportunity. There's ways to bring them closer to the table, but it is fundamentally first the art of listening before anything else.
Yep. So I'm gonna take this back a little bit, because I think that art of listening thing is a thing we don't talk about a lot, right? Mm-hmm. We say it. All of popular psychology reminds us that it's why our relationships are failing. It's what we forget to do. Of course, HBD is dedicated to a fair amount of ED&I work, but we also very much talk about the where it doesn't have to be separate from everything else. And I think the art of listening and the art of listening for what people are saying is a big part of that. And so I would love the thing, we're at a point in our careers where we can start to look and go, oh, that was an experience where I had to teach myself to listen. And I talked about this all the time, that working through translators, touring with dance companies, taught me how to listen to a client that's speaking English with different jargon, but is telling me what they want. And not just the words, but what are the feelings that are behind it? What are some of the experiences where you gained that? Because I think right now I'm running into places where people are like, what's a masterclass I can watch? What's a book I can read? And part of it is I'm like, get out of your bubble. Get out of the people who speak like you and talk like you. Working with people who come from a different, even if you're conversing in the same language, who have a different base language, starts to teach you how to listen differently. What are some of those points now that you're like, oh, yeah, that was a time where I totally had to just listen and pay attention, right? Like I'm gonna assume that jumping into exhibitions and historical restoration was a point where you were like, oh, I understand the science of this. I'm gonna have to listen to what the hell drives you people. What made this start?
You have to check your ego to listen, and luckily in my 20s, I was pretty shameless about that. So I was in historic preservation, but there's no NAICS code for historic preservation. It always gets shunted straight into construction, because at the end of the day, if you're putting up scaffolding and you're using equipment and power tools and chemicals, you're construction, according to the federal government. And I was running this project because I was the least artisty type person in the company. And I was up for anything. And the client called and said, Gee, there's a problem with the anchor bolts on the architect drawings. This is one of my favorite stories. One of the architect drawings, there's a problem with the anchor bolts. And I said, hold on one second. And I go and I pull out my 6 copies of architectural drawings. And I said, okay, so I can happily figure out what needs to be changed here. But first, I'm going to need you to tell me what an anchor bolt is. And the woman started laughing, and she was like, oh, okay, absolutely. And she just walked me through what I was looking at and where it was. And it started an honest conversation of, I was never going to get there by pretending to know that I was pretending that I had, 20 years of expertise in the construction industry. Like listening, in order for me to be able to listen and learn from her, I had to own up to the fact that I didn't, graduated from UCLA with a physiology degree. What the heck does that have to do with putting up a building on federal property in Houston, Texas? And it created a dynamic where then I could be a sponge of information. But at the end of the day, you don't have to have extreme situations like this. You have to realize that listening is what earns you the right in the expectations game, because you're not entitled to demand expectations in a certain way. Expectations are what happens on the other side of the table. And if you're present at the table, you can help manage them, but you're not entitled for someone to have the right expectations of you. There's an exchange there. And you can be working with the same company, the same title, the same type of project, the same city. If you don't know what the win is for the actual person you're working with, you don't actually know what the end game is. You know, if somebody's in that company, they're brand new and they need to prove themselves, they need a big splashy win. If somebody's been in that company at a mid-range and they want to show that they've got the discipline to just get things over the hill, that's a whole different thing. If somebody's in that company and they have a boss who is obsessive about data and numbers, the type of status reports you give them so that they have a win are totally different. So the opportunities to listen are literally right in front of you, because the end game is how you make something a win for the person that you're working with, who then turns it into a win in their company, and it comes back to your company. So long. I don't have a book. I mean, this is my trouble.
Yeah.
It's like when you cut your teeth in the deep end, it's like I want to pass on and to share, but I'm not great at knowing exactly like read this podcast and this TED Talk and it's going to be life-changing and you'll know what to do next.
Back to great marketing bits, right? So it's literally called in positive psychology the G.I. Joe fallacy at this point, because when G.I. Joe had an animated series, every episode ended with, and knowing is half the battle, and they teach you some little tidbit of knowledge. And knowing isn't half the battle. Knowing is about 10%. It's the doing that's 80%. So we can listen to all the podcasts and read all the books, and part of that is what's going on this year with the year of, I call it the year of awareness.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are calling it uprising, and it's like, I don't know, that was just protests. Maybe it's because I've been in too many countries where I've seen real uprisings. Where a lot of people who were starting to unpack those notions of inequity and oppression and where, the level of white supremacy that's just baked into the cake of our society, started to interface with it by buying books. But they didn't necessarily read them. And part of that is acquisition culture, which is a thing we're trained into, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we have to give ourselves the permission to say, like, yes, I have also been told that this is how I do things, right? You buy a textbook for a class, and it's very weird when somebody, like, when you get an instructor like me who's like, I want to give you free things. Here's a whole bunch of links. Here's the other books you can go read too. I get a lot of questions on that of like, why don't you assign textbooks? And it's like, you get a lot of textbooks. You get a lot of information that way. And no matter what the thing is that you're trying to learn, you have to be articulating it and putting it into practice. And that is a big part of the psychology of what is an experience and a psychology of what branding is that works. We've got somebody who commented that their favorite campaigns are the ones from the Comic-Con or South by Southwest when they market new shows and movies. And so I'm going to take it way back. One of the things that Jee and I have shared for decades is a deep, deep love of sci-fi, particularly Star Trek. We were going to cons before it was cool.
Way before it was cool.
When trying to convince a parent to come with us that a passel of under-able to drive teenage girls and preteens wanted to go to the not even San Francisco. San Francisco was the nice one.
Mm-hmm.
The Sacramento or Fresno Hilton for a day to go around the bars and the conference centers. And what I love about what Comic-Con has become, what South by Southwest have become, what all of these things is that somebody paid attention to what worked, which is the gathering and the sharing and the letting go of the preciousness of what we thought were going to be what people loved about our thing, and listening to what they loved, right? There are a million Saturday Night Live bits about the ridiculousness of Star Trek conventions. There are still plenty of Star Trek conventions, and any actor who's been on a franchise will talk to you about how being with the convention circuit is what allowed them to put their kids through college, right? And it allows an interaction. It allows you to personalize. It allows you to talk to the people who created, and it allows you to share that thing with someone else. And that's really the space that location-based entertainment jumps into, right? We provide you the space. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about open areas to mix and mingle and talk about these things. Whether it's the days of Star Wars at, now it's going to be at Hollywood Studios and Disneyland where Galaxy's Edge is, but those existed long before, right? That licensing deal's been going for decades. The Harry Potter Con that happens down here in Orlando every July, where it's just fans from all over who come in. And people wanted that so much that then the studios jumped in and started providing speakers. Watching the evolvement of just what Comic-Con is, right? I always get into this funny thing when how somebody talks to me about Comic-Con tells me how I know them. So from an events producer background, I do a lot of work that is putting stuff up that is the nuts and bolts of how do you put up a con of that size, or PAX or PAX East or the JoCo cruises, right? Like I've got a lot of inroads into that. So there's just the nuts and bolts, right, of putting on a conference. And that is not so different, but you have to pay attention to your audience, right? Right there. There is the fact that I will go as a fan, right? I went to gaming cons for years where it was just tables. And that's something that's really interesting now, right? Like now that I'm a grown up and a producer and people are like, well, what is this magic thing that's going on, or something else that it's like, oh, right. To me, this is water. This has been there all along. Watching Pokemon Go take on with folks and watching everybody try to grab into that, and understanding both things, right? I'm both the right nerd and the right producer who was watching Ingress, and who's also like, okay, so how did this start? Oh, it was a group on the Google Maps team who was trying to get people to use the walk feature and knew that if they created a game, that would get people out and walking. And now Niantic is doing the Harry Potter games and so many things. And the amount of people who are trying to create that lightning in a bottle, and that it is not pretending you know what your fans want, but also allowing yourself to be flexible.
Well, you look at the Wii, and granted, I didn't have to deal with Wii shortages because I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and nothing really runs out in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Like, all of my friends up and down California were like, you can't get a Wii anywhere. And I walked into the Santa Fe Sam's Club, and I was like, look, there's like 25. Should I buy them and send them to people? But, Nikki and I have a friend who's in the gaming industry, and that platform completely took the industry by surprise because it wasn't the latest technology. It wasn't the fanciest new technology. It wasn't the most cutting edge technology. It was exactly what that type of consumer wanted. Family consumers, families that buy for families of 5 and 6, that have that collaborative experience. And so on the game side, it took the industry by storm. There weren't enough games for the platform because the platform industry was built on, driving on whatever is the latest, greatest. And it technically wasn't the latest, greatest, but it was exactly what the market wanted at that time.
Mm-hmm. Gaming's another great inflection point, right? We're bringing that into parks. One of my great joys was working with so many colleagues when I was at Universal who had worked on the now open Super Mario World in Osaka and all of the disambiguations that are coming. And I am sitting and watching other people watch the videos and waiting to see what they react to. But one of the things I will always love about how it's designed, and it's very clear on anything that you see, is that they're physically activated interaction zones, right? You actually punch a block. And the differing conversations that have to happen to get people to that, right? Like, how do we, this is my world, is how do I build the robustness so that 4,000 people can punch this thing an hour? And that 8-year-old who just stands there knocking it like the shell in World 3-4 of Mario. some of us want to do that, and some of us are still going to do that. And Lord help us all when we deploy it down here in Orlando and we sell you booze while you do it. What it has to hold up to, but also that wish fulfillment goes back to a very specific thing, and that's actually what all of our initial kind of monolithic Hollywood parks were doing, right? You had your adventure zone and your sci-fi zone and Westerns and storybook fantasies. And that's not a whole lot different than where we have branding now. One of the things I as somebody who loves to wrap her head around any number of both physical and video games for decades, is we're playing with this intersection of gaming in theme parks all the time, which, having had to build a zone in Dubai with 22 different video game parks, that is an intersection of branding. That is an intersection of 22 studios telling you what their demands are and how they will be talked to against their competitors. And I think that's one of the things that I kind of, again, to the Comic-Con example, right? I have all of my colleagues for whom, when we go to Comic-Con, and when we're sent down there, there's something we're presenting. There's something we're there to look at. We are judging and guiding and seeing everybody else's things. And so some of us also go as fans, and that you actually have to set out specific days. I'm going as a fan today. I'm going to enjoy the thing. And that one of the things that I think we forget in theme parks right now is standing in line is a part of the experience.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there is the joy. Like, we are right at that age, I'm going to date us now, of monocultures were part of our life. And that's a big thing that everybody's talking about right now, right? The disambiguation of monoculture, because we're not all focused on the same thing. Star Wars is no longer a monoculture. Growing up, it was the original 3 trilogy. And it had come out when we were toddlers and very young kids. So there was absolutely it might have missed you until you got to high school or college. College was when the next the prequels came out. And even if you were going to decide to be the person who hated on it, you still slept out and took shifts to get tickets. I don't hate on it. I do still look at it from a storyteller's eye of, I wish you'd had an editor. And I know that because I was up all night finishing my scenery design final before I went. And so I fell asleep through the entire tattoo, like all of the pod racing I lost. And I went back and saw it the next week and realized I'd missed nothing. But now we have people who are interacting it with Galaxy's Edge who are used to a movie coming out every year, right? The kids who I have in my parks who are coming to ride Rise, it's not a wait and see thing, right? It's not a communal gathering thing. It's as much there as The Price is Right was for many of us. And that's a weird thing to wrap my head around.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Well, and yeah, I'm always going to remember Disneyland as a kid who grew up in California as Disneyland, not Disneyland, Star Wars, Marvel, and what it is today. But, when we talk about branding, most people focus on branding is what you say you are, and the really, truly great brands know how to listen to what do we mean to our audience, because that's just as important as what we say we are. And you know what? If you mean something to an audience in a certain way, that is something you should hear and then embody. Like, not everybody has to ingest your brand in the way that you thought they were going to. But the bigger component of that is also, what are you not? And it's one of the hardest things when you're growing a business is that you get more customers and more sales and more people to you when you start saying no and you're clear about what you're not. Like, if you are the agency that will service anyone and everyone and will do anything for any price point, anytime, you're going to have a hard time growing your agency past a certain point. And then when you say, like, if you are an agency that's like, I only service middle market companies or manufacturers, or I only service nonprofits, or I only do social messaging, then all of a sudden your fear of like getting business starts to go away, because people know exactly who you are and resonate with it. And you actually then start to have more business than you could even accommodate. So knowing what you are not is incredibly important, because otherwise, how do you have the confidence to stand in the branding space of what you are if you don't know what you're not?
And what's great about that statement is if you came to this discussion and you're like, well, I'm going to see what these members are doing, and Nick and Jee tend to put on an interesting show. What you don't do and what you take out is, in fact, the key to design. Right? We live with so many of these designs for years that we can just keep cramming layer onto layer of things. And then we have to remember people are flying through them at anywhere from 4 to 65 miles an hour. It's maybe a 2 to 4 minute experience. Take the things out. It's the old drag queen adage of walk into your closet, put all of your accessories, spin around, and whatever catches your eye, take those 2 things off. Right? What are the things you take out? And I think that's one of the things that we miss. It's back to that monoculture myth, right? We're so used to like, I want to be all and end all. And yet the amount of value that I add to my clients who are real estate developers who want to create a cool thing, or to the brands that we work with by saying, I don't do that, but here's my partner who does. And we're going to build a collaborative team. We're not going to pretend that they are in my office and we're going to talk to you both as equals to create how we put your message out there is huge, right? I think it's, there's a little bit of a bidding war, and we seriously watched it with Fox, right? For content and wanting the next big thing. And for those of us who are looking at it from theme park consumers, it's always like, well, what's the next Jurassic or Star Wars or Potter or those things? And it's like, well, okay, we have to listen to, those are all generationally coded. And that's a thing we're only starting to understand and only starting to look at. And I have found that as a producer, actually my best allies in that fight are often my consumer insights groups, because they have data, and data can't lie, right? It can be manipulated, it can be presented, but it can't lie. It's just a number that's there. So when we're looking at what's the next big thing, we have to sometimes ask, what's the next thing that we have available for our partnership? And I have a hunch that kind of cost-benefit analysis look on it, while also understanding the story, is how you are able to give. I want to hear about how RedRover gives a guarantee on satisfaction.
It's good old-fashioned hard work. Okay, there's no substitute for doing the hard work, which is understand the target that you're going after, understand the market, understand the competitive landscape, understand what the company is, who they are and who they are not, and then sit firmly in that space. And there's enough room in the execution strategy. Like, we are not the agency that's going to be like, Facebook is going to change your life. Just put these things up. You're going to get these impressions. You're going to get all this business. That's not what the results guarantee is. The results guarantee would be like, HBD wants to increase its membership by 100%. Well, then it's, who is the right person to be in your membership? What is the competitive space, real or perceived? Because you can have a competitor who doesn't sell what you sell, but they're taking up the marketing space. They're still your competitor because they're taking up the space. And then what we do is we execute a strategy which is not focused on, gee, run this ad campaign and tell me what the results are. It's, gee, I need membership. That's the number I'm going to be tracking. And my team goes around and says, Facebook is doing okay, but it fell off. We've had a young member who did this upswing on TikTok. Let's move the dollars over here. You know what? We're actually getting better ROI from just the people who pick up the phone and call. Let's engage Nicola's team to make 10 extra calls. It's about what the result and the outcome is, not any specific tactic. And this is the fallacy a lot in the marketing space, is that advertisers are hitting you, and advertisers make you believe that it's spend money in their space or somebody else's space. But really, a marketing strategy is, what are all the pieces you need to surround your consumer in the right way? And so when advertisers are fighting for your dollar, you start to believe this paradigm that it's like, oh, I got to spend money here or here. And a marketing strategist is going to be like, no, they're all wrong. We're going to take this pie and we're going to put, a third over here and a third over here. And, we're going to build this together for your person. and that's what we do. But it's also this notion of collaboration is really interesting, because I get asked the question a lot: are you guys an in-house agency, or do you use, do you outsource? And they say it to me in a value way, that like somehow 100% in-house is better and more premier and more slick, and outsourcing is passing the buck and not doing very good work. And my answer to that is neither and both. I consider us what we call a hybrid agency, which is some of the roles are critical to be within the agency. They need to be closer to the brand. They need to be closer to the values. They need to be nimble and have speed. Some specialties are better in a company that specializes in that, because entrepreneurship will push them to be the best at what they do. So I can hire an SEO person and bring them in-house, or I can allow the free market in the SEO space to create the best SEO vendor possible and use their services. And so it's a combination of partners, but it scares people. It scares people, the idea of like, why aren't you holding it all controlled in here? And it's because at the end of the day, I need to bring the best marketing and sales strategy and services to you, not the ones that fulfill my ego because I just have them all on payroll. So at the end of the day, for us, it's the fidelity to the work and the results, not necessarily, the perceived image of being like, you can come to us for anything. And what we say is, between us, our in-house staff and strategists, and our certified network of partners, we can tackle it and we'll take it on. But we don't pretend to have every specialty, creative, marketing, and sales specialty under one roof, and to be able to remain competitive in that way. That's a fallacy.
Yep. So I'm going to pause here to remind everyone who's watching, is as all HBD offerings are, this is open to you. If you've got questions, I just got a nuts and bolts question, so we're going to get into that in a minute from both of our experiences. I'm also going to remind us all that tomorrow we are doing the Women in Leadership panel with RedRover. So those of you who are sitting here thinking, well, I work for a nonprofit, or we're a not-for-profit model, or we're experimenting with a Corp B model, that doesn't apply to these big corporate things. A, yes, it does, first off, but also B, come talk with us tomorrow. We've got some great other guests. And if you're feeling a little shy and you've got 3 other questions that come to you when you're driving to the market next week or doing the laundry, pitch them back at us. We can make this a monthly thing where I drag Jee back here and we talk through. We are both people who are watching everything, so we've got a pretty good sense of how to break things down. So the question that I got was explaining the process of what it looks like when marketing is included in the design process and how it affects designers. And this is something that we came up in the early planning for this show, is that if your only intersection with design experience is particularly design competitions, everything from an academic lens, early training, they happen in a bubble, right? They give you an assignment and you're working with your designers. So it can feel very foreign, the idea that we work with marketing. And this is a things you learn, right? Multiple decades into this, it is a jadedness that I laugh and go like, well, it's just there. Like, it is the water we swim in. But to break down how that works, and I'm going to choose to take it from the design services group tactic, because that's the largest population I think all of us experience in our first couple of years. So we've got the big 2, or as I so lovingly call them, patient 0 and zombie 1, right? Who are their own owner-operators and design groups. Now, first off, they also have always been very good at recognizing what they don't do and bringing in collaborators. So there are often design groups that those teams hire in for this. There's also the consumer insights and marketing units that come in, right? And they own their own. The design services world, again, back to that biz dev word, back to that finding, it is a client services model. So often our client has an idea of what they want from something. We sometimes kind of refer to projects as vanity projects for billionaires. And I'm going to remind us all that Disneyland is a vanity project for an animation millionaire who wanted to ride trains with his buddies. He's self-funded. That's the model. So we can poo-poo it when it's somebody from another country or a different sector all we want. But the first question is, what's the guest? And if it's just the owner and their buddies, you start asking questions about what is it that they want and experience. More often, it's part of a larger development. It is, we are trying to draw hospitality. These are the hotels and what we are trying to draw. So looking at those demographics, a big key part of that is listening to what's in the region that you're in, even within the US, right? Different regions react to things differently. But also B, why did they come to you, right? I can't take off the lens of being an American designer. I've been here forever. I have an entertaining overlap of what American culture means to me. But if somebody comes to hire me for something, they're hiring an American. And I think that's also really important because we have a lot of international students who are coming in and training in our design programs. We're not requiring you to turn into the perfect American designer. All of these things add. All of these things continue. There will be things that you know more just because they're a region you are more familiar with. Or, like one of my favorite jokes is all of the future is female t-shirts, right? That's a language pun because in most languages, female is a female imperative word. La futura es female, right? Futura is the feminine, is future, but it's also a female language. We wear that around the US because we're like, girl power, yay. Mm-hmm. And everybody who speaks another language is like, do you get it? Do you know the joke you're wearing? Right? And that's a thing we have to look at. We have to look at that when somebody says, I want Mario to come into my market. And it's like, well, are you the market that birthed it? Or are you the market that just got it in the last 10 years? That's a big question. And so what we're looking at, there's usually a level of indicator that's in there, right? That's part of our feasibility studies on, is this a project? How funding is it? Is it about rides or is it about experiences or it is about gaming? What are we creating? How often does it have to renew is a big part, right? What your ticket purchasing model is a big part of our design, right? Are you a local park where everybody buys an annual pass and comes to hang out, and this is the communal gathering space? Or are you a once in a lifetime park where people save up and come for a once in a decade trip, right? Or both. Are you trying to satisfy both? Did you think you were one and it turns out you're the other and now you're 5 years in and you need to add some more newness because you planned, and this is a thing we saw in the Dubai market over the last 20 years hugely, right? Many of these were created as one-time big experiences, and overwhelmingly the market is locals. There are people who are there who just want somewhere to be or are connecting to a brand that's beloved. And that's when we really have to get into, right? There's so often that people say, oh, I don't want to do area development. I only want to do e-ticket rides. I only want to do the big game changers. You're going to spend 75%, probably more, of your day in that area development. So you can ignore that all you want, but that's actually what people are coming for, right? When we talk about these big game changing experiences, it's actually the environmental. And all of that is, so sometimes I contract somebody like Jee to help me get my optics and find out, all right, we're going into this zone. What's going on there? What is already there? What's popular? What are the historical contexts of what's going in? How do people interact with it? Even what are the local languages? We forget that all the time, that there's the official languages and then the localized languages. How is slang different in that area? All of that actually often comes from my marketing and consumer insights teams. But that outright impacts how somebody interacts with my design. And this goes back to that empathy of listening and not just telling. I think we've forgotten that marketing is the study of markets, right? Like that.
The active study of markets, the verb.
It is, right? Like flip it around. That's what it is. These are the reference librarians I can find who know how to, how Jee pulls up an area to inform it and research it is very different from how I interact with it. And once we can put both of those together is how we start to see the whole picture. Jee, one of the things I'd love to hear from you is, as we move away from monoculture and as we move into everybody takes things from many different channels and streams, how has learning entertainment impacted how you can put out an impactful marketing? Like, what are the things that, I think one of the great examples you used was the, like, we're going to try and make something poignant. So let's get Paco Bell's canon in D and let's have a testimonial, and then we'll have somebody crying, and then we'll show a puppy, and then, or Sarah McLachlan's Angel, right? Like, there's like 4 songs that, like, this is a deep, impactful thing that we're going to put out there. And that's the thing. We're still framing marketing as commercials. And it's not.
Yeah. The question is what is the conversation? Even if you can't hear the return, even if you don't get to talk to the person who sees your billboard, there's still something that sparks a conversation. And if you're not driving a conversation, you're not actually choosing to be inclusive of the person, sitting across from you. One of those great rundowns of, Nick, like equity versus diversity versus inclusion. I was trying to explain it in a way and reframe it for some young people. And I was like, look, if you look at me, diversity is that I'm a person of color and I'm, and I'm present. Equity is that I'm at the table, and I'm a stakeholder. Inclusion requires my opinion. You can't check off inclusion without actually speaking to me, because if you ask me, who is the person in entertainment, like on just general TV, like mainstream television, that I have felt most resonated, like that is me, that I've connected with, it's not any other Asian person on television. It's Sterling K. Brown on This Is Us, because he's a Black man born in 1980, grew up in a white family in upstate New York, and his challenges being an adopted Korean are my challenges. But from the surface, nobody would guess that. And that's the conversation. Like, that show started and I was like, this man is me. I don't even understand. Like Fresh Off the Boat is a great show, and Margaret Cho's stuff is a great show, but it wasn't actually me. But you don't get that without the conversation. And so the power of what we got today is there's so many places to spark conversation, but the responsibility is that you're there for the conversation, because you're not entitled for somebody to react the way you want them to react just because your intentions are good, you did your research, you did your homework, and you think it's right. And I think a huge example of that is, was it Burger King? Burger King put out an ad, a woman's place is in the kitchen. And they did it. They did it to, promote, their program that is turning women into franchise owners. I think it's Burger King. If I get it wrong, please tell me. But just because their intentions were right, they felt like it would resonate, that it was supporting a program that is actually a great thing. They're not entitled for that to land well. They need to be present for the conversation. And of course it did not land well, because we're in a space where you only get one sentence to make a first impression, and you don't always get, the 5 minutes afterwards.
It was Burger King. A great example of that is there's a podcast for Scrubs called Fake Doctors, Real Friends, because Donald Faison and Zach have become really good friends, and so they rewatch things. There was an episode where, if you're not familiar with Scrubs, it's one of those inside of the head, outside of the heads things where often you'll be watching a scene and then it'll take to what the subtext is that's going on in the character. And a woman walks in and one of them flashes to seeing a bunch of swimsuit models come in. And on the podcast, they actually call themselves out of like, we almost got the misogyny right there. We didn't take it over to like, so now we watch it and it's just kind of creepy because it wasn't clear enough that it's satire. Trying to do satire for a thing that you don't own can be really, really difficult, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sarcasm is I mean, I'm Gen X. Sarcasm is literally how we communicate. But we also have to unlearn that, because that requires so many contextual clues and references to understand what's going right. Burger King thinks that they are reclaiming the frame of women belong in the kitchen, meaning franchise owners, without unpacking that they have not made enough change or done enough that stating that sounds anything like a reiteration of old norms. It doesn't sound like changing it. It doesn't sound like a reframe. It just sounds like you're putting it back out there. And I think that's the thing that we have to, like, when we're talking about brands, when we're talking about things, like, we have to look at things very genuinely and really kind of, and it's a vulnerability, right? It goes back to that vulnerability of being willing to say, like, I have no idea what you're talking about. You tell me a little bit more. This isn't my strong suit. Tell me more. It's right up there with not being afraid to fail, because failure is really good data, right? Star Trek, I'm always going to drop it. You can, Picard, you can do everything right and still lose. Yep. And that's, I think so often we're looking for blame, and we do that in project development all the time. Where did we go wrong? And it's like, well, we actually did 20 things right. The thing that didn't land the way we thought it would was this, but what we learned is everybody wants to be a wizard and put on a robe, right? One of the, I don't know if it's true or not, but the urban myth is that the original Universal team didn't think wands would sell in the theme park lands, because it was too simple. It was too much of just a prop that didn't do anything. And now we have wand magic, and we're unveiling new versions of it every year.
Well, I'll up the ante on that one. I was building the website for one of the new Star Treks, and I was told explicitly, this is an action movie, not a space movie. And I removed, at the request, every single image of the spaceship in space other than the movie poster, because it's an action film, not a space film. And I said, yeah, pretty sure I'm the audience for this film, and I'm pretty sure when the movie is called Star Trek, you really don't need to worry about putting a starship in any of the images. But yep.
Jee, I know that we're running short on your time, so if I have to lose you so far, and I'm going to remind everybody, if we've got more questions, we can come back and do this again. Come and join us tomorrow. We're going to keep going, but we've got a great question from somebody in the chat. Their local park is Alton Towers, UK. It's localized to suit the English countryside. And what are the thoughts on original versus non-IP storytelling and themed entertainment, or will IP always dominate? First off, it's not either or. We got to throw away this black and white thinking, and the word always is actually the biggest danger. Like, using the word always is actually what blocks us from future-proofing. When we want to future-proof something, it's making space for it to evolve and change, and for us to listen to our guests. If we say it's always going to be something, that's where we're going to block it out. Right now, the current, but this is perfect to this Venn diagram conversation, right? The reason we have such a current targeting of IP and purchased brands actually goes back to that conversation of demographic driving and key project indicators, and how will it feel when we've won this, right? From a creative lens, I like to ask my writers, what will I feel like if we've met this creative goal? What will I experience? Part of it is the delineation of what I experience, but also, what does it feel like? Some things we do, we want people to feel scared, right? If I take you to Halloween Horror Nights, that's what you're there for. But that's also part of our demographics, our key project indicators, and our consumer insights. Right now, the skewing towards purchased IP licensing and marketing co-branding is because it's easy to data capture. It's easy to say that it's likely that if I bring this brand into my park, I'll get this percentage of people who are just following the brand, and I'll get this percentage of interest, and I'll get this much tie-in. And it's a way to quantify those early nebulous stages of blue sky created IP can feel more dangerous, right? At the same time, Lord help me. I went to Walt Disney World for the first time in my 30s on a business trip, so I have a different intersection. But the amount of my colleagues who opine lovingly about Figment that I still cannot wrap my head around, which is a creature from a specific attraction here at Epcot, and I'm still trying to understand it, right? That's a created thing, and that's something that hits, and that's because what it's talking about is the spark of imagination and the joy of creation and creativity. Like, that's why we all hearken to this character. That's not going to go anywhere. And if there's not a brand to purchase to create that, then we want to create our own. One of the other big branding sites that we don't talk about as a big branding event, but that's what it is the Olympics, right? And every Olympics has a created, localized mascot to it. It's a big part of it. It's a big part of like where they show up, what their names are, how they're represented, when they come in during the 28 days of the games are a big conversation. So I don't think there's going to be an always, right? I think particularly now that we see this quest for synergy and this wanting to be in it, one of the things that Margaret Carrison talks about a lot, she's the head of story for Star Wars at this point, is that anything that happens in park is canon now. And that's a specific choice they made. And when they were setting that, they actually sat down with all of the canon, including the fan novels and the universe, and delineated what they were going to use from the movies and the ongoing disambiguated series, the games that are coming out, what's going on in there. So somebody has to monitor that. And what's interesting about it is that that's a really great, for those of us who have read all the novels and done all the nerdery, there's a lot in there that wasn't brand created, that were beloved fan created characters that are now canon and part of the universe. That happens in Star Trek all the time. I was going to say that happens in Potter. Jo's her own special beast, and I think what we're seeing of the fans choosing to take it over and separate it from its creator is going to become a really interesting discussion. But that's also part of it, right? Like, we got to let go. We got to let go of the preciousness and ask people what they want. And it may be. Go ahead.
Well, you're talking about strategy following emotion. And that's the holy grail of it, is that it's not really IP or not IP. It's the strategy is following the current emotion, and some of that is generational, and some of it takes 40 years for it to turn over. But it goes both directions. And a great example of that is Pirates of the Caribbean. Like, it had to be a good movie for the movie franchise of that to take off, but the reason why you had the original fan base going to the theaters to see it is, one, because Johnny Depp is weird and hilarious, but two, is because of the ride. And yes, there are people who love the movie franchise without ever having been to the ride. I was sitting in a movie theater laughing hysterically with the dog in the prison, holding the keys, because I remember coming around the bend and you just want, like the dog and the keys to reach the prisoners. But they followed the emotion of the ride and how beloved it was over multiple decades and generations into film. And now we're also following the emotion of these film franchises into the physical location base. So the strategies are always going to shift. They're going to follow what is tapping into the emotion of the current money spending generation that is powering entertainment.
Yeah. Madeline, the other thing I would add is, I think something like our local regional parks, those are going to change as the local groups change, right? When we look at the arc of Magic Mountain, or in Alton Towers, or Cedar Fair even, or there's 4 different parks that call themselves Great America. Dollywood's always going to be Dollywood because it's Dollywood. But each of the Great Americas changes slowly so that you don't necessarily perceive it, but to the tastes of what the local groups are. As rural areas become suburbs and exurbs, they attract a different group, and we start to see different languages coming in, and different groups coming in, and different tastes coming in, and that's when we start to see changes. And I think that's where we're going to start to see. I think we're going to see created IP creep back in, and I think we're going to see more of this. It's basically an Ouroboros, right? The Pirates example. Because Pirate Shanghai is absolutely themed to the movie. And we're slowly sneaking Johnny into even the classic original back here, because it's more interesting. And And that was always meant to change, right? It was not meant to be a time capsule in a bubble that we only updated the one same figure that does 2 bottle moves back and forth, right? If we only did that, we'd never get Hondo, and Hondo is fantastic, and I love him, right? And I think that's, and Avatar is a great example of that too, right? It was very pretty, but what the park gives you is something that's very, very different from what the movie gives you. Partially because they're in different parts of the timeline, but also the only thing that was borrowed was the environment, right? So we're gonna continue to borrow back and forth, and I think that is where one of the interesting things when we run into Meow Wolf, which I know Jee had a long history with, right? They feel like they're very created and outside of everything, but they are actually very much of the world of art that they are in. They are very related to the communities that are bringing their exhibits. They're very like Omega Mart that just opened up in Vegas, right? It starts to change, and you can see the influences of the artists that they bring in and where those things come in. But much of it has very clear references to other known marketing tools and brands. Like, it's making commentary, it's discussion, it's a different experience of it. It's unpacking your experience of what American supermarket branding is, right? Just watching the advertising campaign, right? We know that is a baseline. So I think that's the thing, is as we become more self-referential, it's going to go back and forth even more. And I'm actually excited for it, because that lets it breathe, right? It's not really, from both a marketing side and a creative experience side, it's not interesting to just keep representing the same thing in the same way for decades.
It's not precious.
Yeah.
It is not precious. And I was once asked, like, how do you deal with the stress of this industry changing like so rapidly? And I'm like, if that stresses you out, you're in the wrong industry. It is dynamic as human beings are. So, you have to be flexible, and I think Nikki and I go back and forth on all of the new Star Treks. We may not like the new one, but it wasn't built for us, and if you can accept that, you could find it an appreciation in a different way, or find a new piece of creative that is your new love for this decade of your life.
Yep. All right. We are very much at our time. Again, I encourage everybody to join us tomorrow for even more on the nuts and bolts of being yourself while doing all of this, and when you can, what to deal with when somebody is telling you that you being yourself is against the area that you're in. We're all at a level where we've had to wield those. That's a big conversation from HBD. So for my members, come join that. But we're going to keep putting out, I think we're going to be doing some of these conversations too. So if you've got more questions for Jee, send them to us at the thing, and I will talk her into coming back in a month or so. If you have an idea of another area that feels like the dark arts of design or branding or marketing or even just company development, shoot it in here. We've got, again, I may not know it. I probably don't, but I've got a member who does, and we've got other collaborators who do. And overwhelmingly, the world informs what we're doing. So let's get that in. I hope to see you all again. Jee, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. And if you're interested in taking your brand or company to the next level, I will encourage you to reach out to RedRover. She doesn't have to pitch herself. In part because how often do we get to come in and say, this is what I need you to listen to me about from my company. What are you hearing? Where does that go? This is a collaboration, right? We talk about this as a generational thing. It's a collaboration. And that is a tool. That is not a dirty word to be avoided, because it just creates extra scope. We're gonna roll our credit, like and subscribe. Check out all of the programs. We're adding things at TETV all the time. If there's something that's not quite there, toss it into the greater TETV, and the rest of us will figure out whose channel can cover it. Sometimes we'll have a conversation. Sometimes we'll have a webinar. If you're dying for just a webinar of something, put that in. This is self-guided, and that can be terrifying, but there's no wrong answer. So get in here and fail with me. We're going to be doing this all year, and we will see you all later. Thank you for joining.